We are back again for the third installment of this amazing podcast episode where we're talking about domestic violence. And we are so thankful that Katherine and Stephanie are still here with us to continue this discussion. Welcome back. So can children recover from witnessing or experiencing domestic violence or abuse? We've kind of spoken to that a bit in our discussion. And Katherine talked a bit about her new support system with her sorority sisters, you know, having friends, having a good relationships with trusted adults, how you have that bond with your mother. And this, you know, can create higher self-esteem, having the healthy friendships, like I said, and, you know, just children will probably never forget what happened to them. As you said, Stephanie, it's not something that you just can slap a Band-Aid on and forget that this happened, but they can certainly learn healthy ways to cope with it and healthy ways to learn how to move through those times where you have a panic attack or you have a flashback or a PTSD moment. You can find healthy ways to navigate that and have healthy support systems in place so that you can rely on those things. Do you all have any input on that?
Well, I think when it comes to healing from growing up with that, it's one of those things I know will always affect me. I mean, I know one day I'm going to get married. I'm getting married very later on because my mom got married early, so she won't even let me get married. So that's always come up in conversation. That's one of those lasting effects. She refuses. She said she's not paying for a wedding till I'm at least 27. So
absolutely.
Minimum 8 years for me. But things like that. So one day I know I'm going to get married. One day I know I'm going to be a mom. And I'm very, very intentional about the friends and the people I surround myself with to make sure that I'm growing to be a better person than how I started with 13 years ago. Or I'm growing to have an example of the people around me that I want to be like. And it's just one of those things. I think I've healed a lot from everything that has happened. But at the same time, I know I react to certain situations because of what I grew up with.
Yeah.
And that's one thing I'm aware of, and I understand that, and I work through that as best I can. But it's just one of those things, especially something when it has to do with a relationship, when you're seeing domestic violence, you're seeing partner violence. I just have to understand that there's certain ways I'll react to things, and the partners that I bring into my life, it does require them to somewhat be empathetic and have I would say one of the most important things for me is making sure that the people I'm surrounded with are empathetic, because should I react some way, you want to make sure that they understand and not let it slide. You know, if I'm in the wrong, please tell me I'm in the wrong. Like, it's not letting it slide, but it's understanding, you know, I might be a little more cautious of doing something like that, or like I might not like your tone. Tone is a huge thing. You know, you're arguing with somebody and your tone gets a little too aggressive. I'm going to come into myself, and I'm going to go kind of on the defense and go into protection mode. And that comes from watching fights when I was young. And that's probably a really good example of one of those things. I will never get over that. I mean, I'm a very good communicator. I am fine with confrontation, but the second you start yelling, I mean, we're not talking anymore. I mean, that is not something I just can't. And so the people I surround myself with, they know that. And, you know, if we have a problem, let's talk it out. We don't need to yell it out, because I won't be able to communicate at that point. So things like that, it's just being very cautious about all of those different situations.
And being open and honest. Yeah. And being open and honest. Too. Yeah.
Exactly.
when we start a family, we're young in love. When we start a family, we all have the best intentions of doing better than what we had. We always each generation wants to improve on, we're appreciative of our background, of our home life, our family. But we always want to do better than what we had. That's the gift we want to give to our children. And then, something like this happens, the unthinkable, the unpredictable. And for me, we've talked about this a little bit this afternoon, but the guilt that I let my family down, I let my children down because of our family story, right? That's a weight. It's a burden that I will have forever. My third son, when we moved to Texas and he was in middle school, I used to kind of tease him a little bit because he was kind of the self-described social worker amongst his peers. He would come home and he would say, this happened to so-and-so, this happened to so-and-so. We're not the only one that's had this horrible fact pattern, right? And that really resonated with me because everybody has stuff. Everybody has bad stuff. And it's not a competition over whose stuff is worse than another person's stuff.
Very important.
And so I think when we overcome or we live through trauma or tragedy, the best gift we can give our children is having empathy that their classmates, their peers, their friends, and someday their coworkers, their extended family members are going to be going through a really bad situation as well. And I used to say this when my kids were young. It's our job to hold the hands of those that are going through the bad stuff because we've come through it ourselves. So I don't know if that had any staying power, but that was one of the lessons I tried to instill in my kids when they were young. And we were in that process of recovering. Once we recover, we've got to help other people, lift them up when they're going through the really dark times.
There was, my husband and I are West Wing fanatics. Okay, so we own at least 5 seasons of the West Wing. But there was one scene in there where Leo told this story, and tells the story of this man walking down the street, not paying attention, I guess, on his cell phone, and the sidewalk is blocked off, and he's not paying attention, and there's a big hole, and he falls right into the hole. Well, there he is. So he sees a doctor walking past, and he's like, "Hey, doc, I fell down this hole. Can you help me out?" And the doctor's like, "Oh, well, he's probably going to be hurting when he comes out." So took out paper and wrote a prescription, folded it up and threw it down the hole and kept going. Then a little bit later, a minister walked by and he's like, "Hey, Rev, I fell down this hole. Can you help me out?" And Rev was thinking, well, he's definitely going to need prayer. So he took out his pad and wrote out the prayer, folded it up and threw it down the hole. And then he kept moving. And then he saw a friend. "Hey, Joe, I fell down this hole. Can you help me out?" Well, in jumps Joe into the hole. And he's like, but Joe, I didn't need company in the hole. I needed help. And Joe said, "Oh, yeah, I know, but I've been here before and I know the way out." And to me, that's really powerful. And that's kind of what, what you were saying, teaching our kids to recognize things that they've gone through and come through, and recognizing that in others and being a help. So I appreciate you sharing that, Stephanie.
I think for me too, because what I've realized about me is, you never really know what people view you as until they tell you. And after, winning Miss Texas Teen, and, I've got a scholarship to Alabama. I'm an ambassador to the school. And one of the reasons why I wait till people know me as a person to tell them about the things that have happened in my family is because a lot of people, once I tell them, they're like, I had no idea. You don't seem like the type. And I'm like, nobody seems like the type to have dad shoot their mom and then shoot himself after years of abuse. There's not a type. There's no stereotype of that. It's a horrible thing that happens. But what I've realized is when I tell people that and when they find out about it, they kind of are like, wow, I can't believe that's happened to you. And you've still done X, Y, Z. And they've been able to kind of see it hasn't defined me. I've used it as best I can to help me with college applications and help me with my college essay. It was my platform for Miss Texas. But it was really something that happens to so many people. And you never think you know somebody who's gone through it. But I also think what's really interesting too is once I've gotten to Alabama, one of my really good friends, she's from Tennessee, and I'd probably been friends with her for, probably 3 months before I told her anything about what had happened. And after I told her, she was like, this exact same thing just happened to one of my family friends. The husband shot the wife and killed her and then killed himself. And I was like, unfortunately, this is something that happens very often. I went to an advisor of mine for a situation that, I kind of was explaining to her a lot of different situations after I was already involved and she had known me for a while. And I told her about my dad and my mom. And she said, this didn't happen to me, but this happened to my dad. His dad shot his mom and killed himself. And I think it's really interesting to see the most put together people, the people you think have everything going on, have probably some kind of connection, or they've got some kind of baggage. And I like that people kind of see different things, on social media, on videos and highlight reels, all that type of stuff. They're like, wow, Kat's doing some really cool stuff. And it helps me to know that I'm doing cool things, but I've overcome all of this. So the people in my life, whatever they're going through, I can help them. And it helps them to see that you can get through any of it.
Powerful, powerful. Thank you for sharing that. Let's move into just one category that we're just going to touch on briefly, but I think it's important and relevant, and that's how the pandemic worsens domestic violence. The time to exposure, the unemployment and resulting financial strain, and mental health and substance abuse, all of that is magnified and was magnified during the pandemic, where you had families that were forced to be behind closed doors and secluded, and these things happening and being revved up even more. What do y'all think about how the pandemic, affected domestic violence?
Well, statistically, it was a lot more prevalent, right? People are stuck at home. They can't go to their jobs. You've got additional pressures where you're with your abuser, or even a person maybe wasn't an abuser prior to the pandemic, but you have financial stresses, family stressors, food, getting paper towels, getting toilet paper. You have all these layers that create an additional level of anxiety and emotion. And then because of the fear of the pandemic, the resources weren't available. There was no place for victims to go. And so it created such a huge problem. Again, I don't know the data on the rise of domestic violence calls for help, but it was obviously there. There's been a lot written about it. It hurt, the shutdown had so many effects that weren't thought of until, they were an afterthought.
Yeah, I have someone that I know who, I say uncovered, she'd been experiencing spousal abuse from a emotional standpoint. And she figured out or saw the narcissism there and all the things that she was experiencing. And during the pandemic, having to like go off and do things for herself, for the family that he very well should have taken care of or could have taken care of. But he wasn't making himself available to do that. And so she ended up filing for divorce during the pandemic. So I know, she's a fortunate story that she was able to get out of that abusive cycle, but she's still dealing with the ramifications of experiencing that and all of the eye-opening things that have come since, things have started opening again, and she's in therapy and she's discovering things about herself. She's recognizing, wow, I was really going through this, like this, I was being abused. So yeah, it definitely took its toll on a lot of people in a lot of situations.
You bring up a point too, whereas I'm being totally speculative here.
Yeah.
Were there characteristics that were recognized that might not have been previously brought to light if it wasn't for the pandemic? Like, would you have been in a holding pattern of living with a narcissist? So in some ways, did the pandemic shed light on a toxic relationship that might have not been ever dealt with? Because again, you're in management mode, it's the status quo. And it took something so disruptive to bring bad behaviors, a toxic relationship to light.
Sure did. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. Because
may have been a silver lining for her, honestly. At some level.
Yes, it was. But she had to think of a way out, and so many people who are in domestic abuse situations or spousal abuse situations have to think of ways out. And one of the things, the first steps is creating a safety plan. Right. So if you're not familiar with what a safety plan is, it's a set of actions that can help lower your risk of being hurt by your partner, including information specific to you and your life that will increase your safety at school, home, and other places that you go on a daily basis. Stephanie, I want to open it up to you, since you have a lot of knowledge when it comes to helping women through this. How do you create a safety plan?
Well, I think it looks like it depends on your situation as to what your safety plan looks like. I had a safety plan. I don't even know if Katherine is aware of this, but I had talked to the older two boys about if things went south, what to do to, go out this door or get out. We lived on 15 acres and to go along the tree line if things ever, I had those conversations, an escape route if things got really bad quickly. And I think because I had that conversation, my second son that called 911 on the house phone, he was prepared on some level. Again, you never want to think that this is going to happen. So I think you definitely want to have a plan. I think the most important thing for women to recognize is that they are most in danger when they leave the relationship. When they are talking about leaving, threatening to leave, or when they actually leave, that's when they are most at risk. So for me, the single most important thing about a safety plan is if you have the conviction, you stick with the conviction and you are not wishy-washy. And you also know that most of the things, the legal documents are replaceable. You can get another driver's license. You can get another passport. But when you are ready to leave, you need to have an actionable steps of where to go and how to be safe. Because everything else is replaceable except for your life. So money, financial resources. I would also say that be very cognizant of who you share your plan with, because you don't want somebody cluing in your spouse or your significant other that you're thinking about this. And then you also have to be very careful that you don't put other loved ones at risk. I mean, there's so many stories of, a woman whose mother or extended family is also murdered because she's staying with them, and the significant other, the boyfriend, the husband, goes to find her and kills them all. These, to me, are the most critical things to think about. You want to go to, people ask me, why didn't you go to the shelter? There was one. It was located between where our house was and the main street of our town. So I would have had to drive, I drove by it every day. And I can assure you that if my husband would have seen my car there, that would have been bad for everybody.
Yeah.
And so it was never on my radar, because I knew it wasn't a safe place. It wasn't a hidden place. It wasn't an anonymous place. And I think you have to be aware of what resources are in your community. Now, when you're in a city like Dallas, you have more resources than when you're in small town Southern Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
So all of those things need to be part of the equation in coming up with a safety plan. It's not a cookie cutter, check the box situation for everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think part of it is just being proactive, thinking about things, in advance, and so that, that, like you said, your son, he had some awareness of what to do in case that happened, but that was because he was pre-warned, which I think benefited. Another aspect is internet safety. And this is something that, that I think has become more of an issue over the past 20 or 30 years. But internet safety, recognizing that your computer or cell phone can be monitored without you knowing it, I think is something to keep in mind. Your history can never be completely erased from your computer or device, even if you're doing it in private or incognito mode. Another thing to keep in mind is emails can be intercepted just like physical mail. And GPS trackers, that can be placed on your car, on items like your purse or cell phone. You want to be mindful of that as well. And some court systems publish records online that has your name and addresses, after you've left the situation. And so it can make you pretty vulnerable. But those are things that I think that that's important to keep in mind in this age that we live in.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Apple has these tags. And I've last year I was hearing a lot about women finding these random tags on their car. So that I guess the premise is you can tap into it from a phone and see the location of the person. So if you are in a situation where you're trying to navigate creating a safety plan, do be mindful if that is something that you have that is a tag or some kind of tracker, that you are mindful of that, because that can be placed anywhere. And we don't mean to, scare you or make you feel alarmed, but we want you to be mindful and be aware of the possibilities so that you can keep yourself as safe as you can. Yeah. So, we talked, we haven't really touched on this much, but Stephanie, you spoke to the shelter in your hometown and the proximity there. A lot of times the lack of access to safe and affordable housing can lead survivors to choose to stay at home. And according to the ACLU, 46% of homeless women reported staying in abusive relationships because they had nowhere to turn. And additionally, 44% of homeless women reported remaining in an abusive relationship at some point in the past 2 years, because they had nowhere else to go and they didn't feel like they had any other options. So it is a huge factor, and a lot of women, I would believe, feel some type of way about getting into a shelter, whether it's for the reasons that you said, or maybe it's there's not access to one. A shelter may be full, you know, so I don't know how you all feel about it, but there definitely should be more access to available housing. And I don't really know what the answer is to solving that issue other than putting them up on every corner, but, you know, just making sure that people have access to it. And again, it's not just women who experience spousal abuse, but the majority of people who enter in these populations are women.
Again, this is a tough situation. It's a tough consequence because abuse is all about control, right? So if a woman is stuck in a bad relationship, he's got power and control to keep her there. And she doesn't probably have access to economic resources to leave. And then if she goes to friends and family, she's putting them at risk, possibly. So it's a very, very complex societal problem. And there is no easy answer. And I think, again, when a woman decides to leave and she has that conviction, these are the things she has to think through very clearly to come up with a plan. And I think it's also very important that she maintain the same routine to her abuser so that he doesn't have any suspicion that anything is amiss.
Yeah.
One of the things that took place is in my situation was we had conversations with my family about me taking the kids, and I have extended family in the Carolinas, and packing up the car and just leaving and just going, you know, to be in, you know, with extended family. Again, on the outside looking in, we had everything. The car that I drove was registered in our business's name, when my husband's business's name. And my fear was that if I packed up the kids, we went on a road trip, and he reported that car as stolen, what are they going to do?
Yeah.
They're going to take me right back to him, and there's going to be hell to pay.
Right.
So it's so important to think through all those nuances, all those details. You can get out. There is a way. It just may not present itself immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to be very mindful, very strategic for your own safety.
Right.
Following those scenarios out to the end. You know what I mean? Like even getting to the point where you think he might report the car stolen. I mean, that you can play that out in your mind before the actual action is happening. And that way you can kind of anticipate anything that might come up, and you're not caught off guard. You know, there's some level of calmness or preparation in you for that. I did want to mention an app that Robin McGraw has, and I think her sister was a victim of domestic violence, but it's called the Aspire app. I like that app particularly because if you click on the app, it pulls up a news feed that looks just like, you know, just like what's happening in politics, what's happening in entertainment. It looks just like the local news. It just pulls up, looks just like a news feed. But there is something that you do, and I won't speak about it here, but it's something that you do to your phone that will alert all those people that you've determined. So like you might have a message that you're sending out to maybe 2 or 3 people that you trust that says, you know, need help now, it's happening, you know, some message. Or you might want to have a 911 programmed in where you have typed in, need help now, please come in quiet. So they know not to come in with their sirens blazing. That might trigger the abuser to then act. But there's a code that you can press, and it sends those predetermined messages out to your people of safety. And so I really like that app. It's called the Aspire app. Robin McGraw created it, but I think that that's, like, in the heat of the moment, I think that that's something that, you know, that you can do that can also help. And I'm really, really sorry to hear about the shelter in your area and how it was not positioned in a hidden place. And it was so, you know, I mean, I think that takes away the courage that it takes for a person to leave a relationship when they feel like it's so exposed. So I think that's something that moving forward, organizations need to think about when they are, you know, creating these places of safety. But research in your area, you know, what resources are out there for housing in your particular area. You know, there's emergency shelters typically, there's hotel vouchers, which I didn't realize. Of course, traditional housing, rapid rehousing, and there's short and long-term rental assistance and mortgage assistance that's out there. And federal, state, and local laws provide housing rights and protection for survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, dating violence, and stalking. You know, whether a survivor wants the abusive partner to leave or if they want to leave themselves. But speaking to what you spoke about, Stephanie, the most crucial and dangerous time for an abused person is when they make that decision to leave. That's when they are at most risk of being harmed or killed. So I think that there's a lot of dynamic and a lot of thought that has to go into it. And I think that when you have children that you're also protecting, you know, there's that element of it too. And I think that we as a community need to be less judgmental of women or men who are trying to leave an abusive relationship, and making sure you respect their timetable. You know, everything is not like on a one size fits all. You know, it's individualized, and I think that's something that we need to consider.
So when you decide to actually leave and move forward with your safety plan, what are the things you need to bring with you? Here's a list. You need to make sure that you bring your driver's license, your birth certificate, if you have children, your children's birth certificates, social security cards, any financial information, legal papers that would include your passport or any protective orders or custody orders, any emergency numbers that you have, medications or medication list, extra set of house or car keys if you have those. You want to also make sure that you consider getting a pay-as-you-go phone, just so that, you know, they call them a burner phone, just to make sure that you have a phone that cannot be traced. If you keep your phone numbers or addresses in a book, make sure you grab that address book and make sure you have a little bit of emergency money as well. Is there anything you would add, Stephanie?
No, I think all of those things are very, very important. Again, you need to assess if you are at how immediate your situation is and how and the danger that you are in. If you can't grab all of those things, you know, then leave, because again, they're replaceable and your life isn't.
Right.
But I also think that in the preparation phase that we've previously talked about, you can, that book of phone numbers, you can start just filing things away. That's part of the planning and the preparation. And whatever you gather is what you gather, and you are out the door.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Such an important point. And then, when you're navigating, transporting to these places, a shelter, make sure that you're asking someone you trust, a friend or neighbor or coworker, even a family member, to give you a ride. You can also have the police pick you up if you feel that involving the police is a safe option for you. And then, keeping cab, train, or bus money stashed in a safe place when you need it is important. Can be helpful. Also, rideshare options, but do keep in mind that sometimes ride shares like Lyft or Uber can be tied to credit cards. So if your partner has access to that information, you want to be mindful of that as well.
Mm-hmm.
And in the United States, the National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24/7. By phone, it's available at 1-800-799-7233. Again, that number is 1-800-799-7233. You can chat with someone from the organization at thehotline.org. And thirdly, you can text "Love Is" to 22522. That's texting the word "Love Is" to 22522. And those numbers will be available on our podcast, on our published podcast as well. So you'll have access to that.
Yeah. Stephanie, can you tell us a little bit more about your website and your mission and your presence on social media?
Sure, absolutely. My website is stephaniejbond.com. And on that website, I talk about my story. I also have coaching sessions available. Now, disclaimer is I'm not here to replace therapy. But as a survivor, I've worked with several women who are trying to navigate what the life after looks like. Also, I am a CPA. I am a vice president of accounting and finance for a real estate developer here in the Dallas area. And one of the things I had to really educate myself on was financial abuse, which was really prevalent in my own marriage. It wasn't something I was familiar with, and yet I was a victim of it. And so I really have a passion for the financial abuse arena and helping women identify what it is and how to get their economic power back. It's this gray nebulous area that is just now coming into its own as far as being a recognized abuse tactic. Mm-hmm. So yes, again, that's stephaniejbond.com. You can shoot me a message there. I'm happy to engage in conversation. You can also book me as a speaker there. You can also access my daughter through me through that website. And then the other thing is, I started TikTok a few months ago, and it's also at Stephanie J. Bond. I was encouraged by actually a friend from the pageant world to put my story out there on TikTok. And I thought, oh God, I am too old for this. I'm not funny. I don't dance. This is not my thing. But I started doing these snippets of 2 and 3 minute videos, just vlogs about my story, our journey, what abuse looks like. Very conversational, talking about many of the things that we've discussed today. And it kind of blew up in a very short period of time. So I encourage you to follow me on TikTok. People ask questions, and I, answer a lot of those in follow-up videos. And I think the thing that has been the most eye-opening for me is the number of women that come to me or that have responded to one of my videos and said, this happened to me too. Mm-hmm. So if nothing else, and you're a survivor, it's a community where you're not alone. So.
Perfect. And Katherine, how about you telling us about your mission or causes that you're passionate about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think in the past couple of years, especially just, kind of coming into my own a lot, I have really developed a very strong passion for the kids who go through these different situations. And, when you're a kid, you can only deal with a deck of cards that you're dealt. That's all you can do. And you got to make do with that. And in high school, I was very involved with a lot of different mentorship programs through my high school, but I've also gone on to continue to mentor a lot of different people outside of those official organizations, and just kind of being a good representative for some of those younger kids, and being there to show them that you're not what your past is, and you can always overcome any situation that you face. And that's kind of a message that I've really tried to emphasize in every single person that I meet, regardless if they're in my life for a day or 10 years. I just think that's one of those things that I've become very passionate about, especially for those younger kids who can't really do anything and they just kind of have to roll with the punches.
Thank you both so much just for everything, for sharing your story, for being open and vulnerable, for all of the knowledge that you brought to this podcast. Is there anything that you would like to share that you didn't feel like you had an opportunity to?
I'll just leave with this, whatever your situation is, it's going to affect you forever, but it doesn't have to define you. And you always have the ability to pivot from victim to survivor. And once you make that pivot, you can accomplish anything. It's really true. You're
stronger than you think.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Well, ladies, this has been a eye-opening conversation and helpful, I think, to so many. And we just feel honored to have y'all's presence on our podcast. And so with that, we say goodbye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.